Hello and welcome to Deep Geek. If this is your first time, a particular welcome to you. I have got a very special guest on today who is one of my favorite people here in the community. And as always, he's going to make a grand entrance. So LML, over to you.
Happy Valentine's Day, Robert. I come before you with an offering of blue roses.
Wow. And a blade. I mean, everything a guy could dream of.
I mean, who knows what's going to happen? You know, we're going to go to the Tower of Joy. We're going to hang out. We'll have flowers. We'll have magic swords, maybe a little blood magic. You know, it'll be a good time.
A little bit of blood magic, maybe a little bit of fire. And then after it all, let's just tear the whole thing down. Guys, happy Valentine's Day to you. If it is Valentine's Day where you are, and I'm blown away. You got a tuxedo top on as well, I can see.
Yes, courtesy to Crowfood's daughter for this attire. She provided it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Amanda. Okay, guys, so today what we're going to be talking about is the Age of Heroes, which I think even your headgear, though, is reflective perhaps more of the Age of Heroes than the flowers, but we're talking the Age of Heroes. And we've got a few super chats I just wanted to very quickly pick up on before we go into the detail. First of all, Maura Lee, thank you so much for your very generous super chat before we started, saying happy Valentine's Day to you, Robert, LML, and all who are in the chat. Just love and appreciation for all your hard work and excellent content you provide on both channels. You are the best. Maura, thank you. You know how much your support means to me. I really appreciate that. Also, we had a couple of super chats, one from Mitch Connor. Thank you very much for that. I think we'll pick up on your question a little bit later if that's okay. I think that will probably fit in a bit better later on in the stream. And Muse in the craft room, thank you. $20 is very generous. I didn't see a question with that one, but that's very kind. And I think there was another one from Catherine Bassett. So thank you. We will pick up on that one very soon. So let's talk about the Age of Heroes. And just as a sort of a starter, LML, why don't you kick us off with what is the Age of Heroes?
The Age of Heroes is an arbitrary delineation applied by the Maesters to very ancient history that they really have no idea about. But that's generally what it is. But more specifically, the Maesters draw a delineation. Basically, all the time before the Long Night is divided into two parts. There's the Dawn Age, which basically means so far back we don't have any effing clue and it's all fairy tales. And then there's the Age of Heroes, where the fairy tales begin to have a little bit of historical evidence for them, and they begin to really sound like mythicized founding of the power structures that we currently have. Like you have the first Storm King, the first King of Durrandon, and we know he basically established a tradition at Storm's End that lasted right up until the current story. You have Bran the Builder establishing House Stark. So basically the Dawn Age is completely mythical, and the Age of Heroes is the stuff that the Maesters think is slightly more realistic and credible. But honestly, we shouldn't put too much credence into any of that. Basically, in my opinion, anything that happened before the Long Night is very much up for grabs and shrouded by the fog of history, because the Long Night would have been such a cultural bottleneck that very little would have survived through it. And so it would have been like a complete reset. Everything that happened before the night would only be remembered essentially mythically. And that, to me, the Age of Heroes and the Dawn Age are essentially just names for that stuff. And the one thing I'll add on to that is that the Age of Heroes, to me, I think a lot of that actually happened right after the Long Night, Robert, because specifically we have these stories about the founding of houses that still exist. House Gardner, House Durrandon, House Stark. And to me, those kinds of power structures would probably not survive through the Long Night. Everything would basically be reset. So that's my take on that.
And I think that's a good starting point for our discussions today, actually. And I'm going to pick up, as we always do, if there are any super chats, obviously we'll get to them as soon as we can, but I'm going to structure this with questions from my patrons. Over on Patreon, I give an opportunity before every live stream for my patrons to throw in a few questions. So their questions form the structure of what we're going to be talking about. And on that, Wonderdog26 Art Girl was asking a sort of a framing question here, saying the time frames drive me crazy. Can't seem to get them fixed in my mind. Perhaps you can create an easier way to remember the different ones. I think LML's probably given a quite a good sort of overview there. My way of thinking about it is that there are three pivotal moments in the way that the Maesters carve up time. This is their version of time in the history of Westeros. Three moments. The most recent one was the Targaryen invasion, what we call Aegon's invasion. That's 300 years before the story that we've got at the moment, and that's when all of the dates are set to 0. So that's after that is their equivalent of sort of AD, and before that is their equivalent of BC or BCE. So that's when they sort of set their clocks by. Then there are two bits back in the past. There is the Pact, which is when the first men and the children of the forest reach some kind of peace agreement, some kind of accord. I'm sure we'll come on to that bit more in a moment, but this seemed to be a really pivotal moment. And that's the kind of the hinge between the Dawn Age, where, as I say, we don't have huge amounts of information, and the Age of Heroes, where we've got lots of myths and legends. And then the third, the middle bit here is the Andal Invasion, which is nobody really knows exactly when it is. Somewhere between those points, could be 2, 4, 6,000 years before the Targaryen invasion, but that's the point at which the first men were no longer the majority in terms of humans within Westeros. So those are the three big points you've got there. You've got, first of all, you've got the Pact, then you've got the Andal invasion, then you've got the Targaryen invasion. Those are the three big points in terms of framing.
And Robert, I think I'd probably just pipe in that the Pact is kind of coupled with the Hammer of the Waters, because we're told that the Hammer of the Waters was sort of one of the last resorts of the children, and soon after that, they seem to have come to the agreement of the Pact. What's also interesting is that the Pact was supposedly signed on the Isle of Faces, but the Hammer of the Waters has two different legends, which everyone's confused about. No one knows if there was two hammers or just two tales of one hammer. But one story has it being called down on the Isle of Faces, and the other on Moat Cailin. So all that Isle of Faces stuff kind of makes me wonder. But in the narrative of the Dawn Age, we're basically said, well, they dropped the hammer, they might have fought a little bit more, and then the Pact is the next thing that happens. So that all supposedly happened thousands of years before the Long Night. But I have a strong case that I will present later that is not the case, that the hammer was actually the Long Night event. But carry on.
I will be very much looking forward to that, and I think I broadly agree with you. I want to just pick up on Anime Lover Nicole. Thank you so much for the super chat, saying, hi guys, could you do a Euro-friendly stream, maybe one every 2 or 3 months? That would be amazing. Maybe Lannister stands for Lan and his twin sister. We'll pick up on that point a bit later. But in terms of a Euro-friendly stream, yeah, I'm actually going to do one. I was going to announce this a little bit later. I'm going to do one on Saturday, just a solo one, a Q&A. I haven't worked out the exact time, but this Saturday, some point at my time, early evening, I would have thought as a Euro-friendly time. And I'm going to hopefully do one of them about every month or so. Just a random weekend with a Europe-friendly live stream. So hopefully, if you're watching this not live because it's very late where you are, then you might get a chance to catch one live. Okay, can we get to something that I talked to you a little bit about before we went live, which is a discussion I had with Gemma, Secrets of the Citadel, in a video a couple of days ago here on this channel. If you've not watched it, you can see it after this. It's called something like, Did the Long Night Really Happen? And Gemma was introducing a theory. I don't think she was claiming it for her own, or I don't think she was claiming that she particularly subscribed to it, but it was a really interesting way to work through this. the idea that perhaps all that we have in terms of knowledge of the Age of Heroes is actually not quite right. Perhaps Bran, in the current time, went back in time and told the stories of what we have happening right now. He told his story of going north to meet the children of the forest, and that got remembered as being the story of the last hero. He told about Jon, and that got remembered as Azor Ahai. He told about Tyrion, and that got remembered as Lan the Clever, and so on. And actually what we've got is him telling the stories back in time, and those stories becoming legends. And so that is why we get this kind of echoing of the ancient heroes and the people in the current day. Quite a few of my patrons have asked for just us to have a quick discussion about that. So I'll throw it to you first of all, LML. What's your immediate take on that thought of Bran going back and telling the stories? And so actually we're just seeing reflections of the present in the past.
So I think it's a cool idea. I don't think it's a Song of Ice and Fire. I think it's a very cool idea, basically, for a different story. I see why people are lured in by this idea because, as we like to discuss on my channel, so many of the events from the Dawn Age parallel or inversely parallel the events in the main story. That seems very intentional. And of course, there's lots of events in the main story that parallel and mirror each other, and characters' arcs that mirror each other. And so after a while, you start to see this sort of fractal network of storytelling that George is creating. And it definitely could lead you to think, well, maybe, maybe Bran's telling the whole story in reverse, and maybe it's all an Ouroboros of time, and there's lots of Ouroboros sort of river of time symbolism going on in the story too. I just think that based on my general sense of the narrative, that the time travel that we're going to see in the books is going to be very, very limited. Because the whole thing about introducing time travel into your story is that it can really lead all sorts of paradoxes and problems. And the way to avoid that is to keep the time travel limited and contained by rules or natural laws or whatever it is. And so I think what we saw in the show with Hodor is the kind of thing we will see. We'll see a green seer looking at the past, and some sort of emotional tug is happening, and he maybe tries to put his finger on something, and it basically just makes everything horrible. So I think they'll basically be it's incense, by the way, the smoke coming off camera. I spilled the bong water before he went on, and yeah, long story. It was a disaster. In any case, erecting banners in a hurry can be hazardous. So got the incense going. In any case, I totally lost my train of thought. Robert, save me. What were we talking about?
We're talking about time travel and whether you think that we're going to get any time travel, and you're saying we're going to see a green seer doing something in the past.
Yeah, so I think it'll be limited. It won't be to the point where Bran is actually the Bran the Builder and goes back and lives other lives in the past and tells the story. I don't think it'll go that far. I think it'll just be like, you're not supposed to time travel, and when you push at those limits, it basically fragments the universe and causes all kinds of bad things. I think that's what we're going to see. That's what we saw with Hodor in the show. I mean, you can make an argument that like, oh, well, it was necessary to make everything happen. But basically, it was horrible, so.
Yeah, I mean, my take on this, actually, Mazamonte, thank you so much for the super chat. That theory would explain what the North was supposed to remember. Indeed, it would make a lot of sense of that. My take on this is that the world of Ice and Fire lives within a closed time loop situation. So it's not that you're creating new realities. You can't go back and change things. Things that you go back and change have already happened. So the good example that I used in my chat with Gemma, or at least I think is a good example, is when it happens both in the books and on the show. When Bran sees his father on the show, he saw him on the steps of the Tower of Joy, and he calls out to him, and Ned just turns and looks. There's a similar thing that happens in the books when Bran sees his father through the weirwood tree in Winterfell again in the past. Now, that seems to me that those things always happened. So Bran just went back to fulfill what he'd already done. And that, in a slightly bigger way, was what happened with Hodor, because Hodor was then fated, always bound to be doing what he did, holding the door. That was why his name was there. He was set up in this closed loop. So I think what we might see, as George R. R. Martin tends to reveal these things in terms of little hints, then a bigger hint, then with something bigger, I think that the Hodor reveal is just showing that something like that can happen on a bigger scale much later. So I can certainly see Bran going back, not, as you say, not being reincarnated in some way or becoming Bran the Builder, but trying to influence something that actually already has happened. And so what we're not looking at is the solution to any of the end game in A Song of Ice and Fire. This isn't going to resolve what happens with the White Walkers or the others or anything like that. This is just effectively creating a loop around why things happened the way that they did. So it's a framing mechanism rather than a mechanism for resolving the issues that have been raised.
And the other thing I will just tack onto that is if you do like time travel, I highly recommend the TV show Dark on Netflix, which is absolutely awesome. It's by far the best time travel story I've ever read. And they're working on season 2. So you seen that one, Robert?
I haven't. No. I'm trying to get a list of what I should be watching next. Because
look into my eyes, Robert. It's Valentine's Day. Watch Dark. Dark is very good.
Wow. Who could resist? LML Lucifer himself telling me about Dark. I'm speechless. Terry of the Citadel, thank you so much for that super chat. I don't see a question attached to that, but that's very kind of you. A couple of other things just on this issue here about the sort of the Bran time travel idea. John Lamb, one of my patrons, talks about the Age of Heroes being mirrored in the current story with our characters and events. Could it just be that we're hearing echoes of the past told from person to person through lifetimes? I think we've largely covered off of this one. Maura Lee says, if Gemma's theory was correct about Bran being able to go back in time, what would his relationship to the Night King be, since there are a lot of fans thinking the Night King is also Bran Stark? Well, do you want to pick up? I'll just first of all say, obviously, the Night King, as opposed to the Night's King, is very much a show character. Probably going to be quite similar in the books, but not exactly the same. But what's your take then on the Bran and the Night's King kind of connection?
So I think that Night's King in the books, first of all, to address that, will end up being a presence inside of the Weirwood Net primarily. It's possible he could incarnate or maybe try to steal Jon's dead body while it's laying there in the snow or something like that. But for the most part, I believe that what we think of as the Great Other is actually Night's King or maybe even Night's Queen living inside the Weirwood Net. Basically, the symbolism, Robert, seems to point that the head of the Others, the core nut of the Others' intelligence and life essence, is rooted in their half of the Weirwood Net, if you will, their frozen part of the Weirwood Net. I've come to that idea over and over again. So I don't know what presence is in there, but I think when the TV show showed their Night King confronting Bran inside the Weirwood Dream, sort of on the astral plane, I think that is something that we're going to see in the books. We're going to see an actual battle inside what we think of as the Weirwood Net. And it will probably involve Bran. So I think that's going to be pretty awesome. And as far as the Bran connection to Night's King, well, it's probably just as simple as the Night's King is an ancient Stark. And so in a way, if the Night King is a problem that the Starks created, or the Others are a problem that the Starks created, then it's going to have to be a Stark that has to sort of like be responsible for it. And that's why we see Jon and Bran primarily positioned to sort of handle and clean up this mess that the Starks probably were, responsible for originally. That's the connection that I see.
Yeah, I think that the first part of your answer, I think that would take a huge amount of unpacking, probably beyond this live stream. But certainly in terms of the second one, I agree completely. There's some connection with the Starks and the others. I think that all the hints are that the reason why the Starks are so bound in with the protection of humanity against the others, which they are through Winterfell and the Wall and the crypts and all the other things, the reason why has to be some connection to their creation or something along those lines. So there's an early issue going on there. Just spotted in the chat, Girl Nettles said, why would the children create the White Walkers and then not release them for 8,000 years? I think that's a really good question. I mean, as an overview, the way I see this broadly working is that the children created the White Walkers in some way, the others, and then they kind of got out of hand. There was the Pact, which was the humanity and the children of the forest realizing that there was a greater threat. After that, through the Age of Heroes, we don't really talk about it so much because we often think about the main characters, the last hero, Lan the Clever, Bran, the Builder, all these people. But there are very clear hints that through that, the children of the forest and humanity coexisted happily with a shared objective of protecting themselves against the return of the others in some way, because the children of the forest were gifting dragonglass to the men of the Night's Watch and things like that. Those kind of details suggest that there was some kind of peaceful coexistence during that period. So, pardon me. So let's get on to.
No. Can I want to pipe in on that one.
Go ahead.
Well, add on at least. So not only were the Children of the Forest giving dragonglass to the early Night's Watch, in the World of Ice and Fire, the Maesters tell us that it was only with the help of the Children of the Forest that the first men of the Night's Watch were able to band together and win the War for the Dawn. Then we have the Last Hero story, which again has the Children of the Forest coming in to help the last hero during the long night. Then you consider that all the first Night's Watchmen would have been first men who worshipped the old gods, since the Andals weren't there yet, and probably there weren't very many Ironborn in the Watch. And so all of the first Night's Watch for centuries and eons would have sworn their Night's Watch vows to weirwood trees without exception. And that really changes the way that you see the Night's Watch vows. Like we see them now, John and Sam taking their vows in front of the weirwood is like this oddball thing. But really, again, this would have been the way all the original Night's Watch gave their vows to the weirwoods. So when they say, I swear to do this, I swear to do this, I will not leave my post, they're promising all of this stuff to the weirwood, to the green seers. And so this really makes a lot of sense. Like the fact that the first men were even able to band together and stand up against the others at all is largely due in credit to the Children of the Forest on some level. And without the children, there might not be any humans around at all. And so you can understand why the Night's Watch would have been willing to swear these obedient vows to the green seers and be like, yeah, I'll do what you tell me.
Yeah. And the other thing I would add on to that in terms of the Pact is fascinating. And at some point I'll do a video just about the Pact. But the wording of it, we don't know the exact wording, but what seem to be the terms of it at least are curious, because all the bits of history that we have is that the humans came in and they were basically committing genocide against the weirwood trees and the children of the forest. Then there was this pact, but this wasn't just a peace treaty with a defeated foe. Yes, the children of the forest agreed to stay in just a few small areas in the deep dark forests and places like that, but then the first men took on the religion of the children of the forest. That's not what you would do if you won. So this wasn't just some kind of like Treaty of Versailles with a vanquished foe. This was an agreement against a common enemy. And it also very much shows that humanity saw the power of the green seers and the children of the forest's magic. So they actually bought into it. And the way that they could do that or embrace it, or the reason why they might do that rather, I think is because they saw what happened with the others. They saw quite how big and important and powerful this is. We've had a couple of super chats I quickly want to pick up on. Terry of the Citadel, thank you so much again. I didn't see a question with that.
It's right here. He says, do
Oh,
you
is it?
guys think there's anything to the symbolism of the show often depicting the Night's King either starting from the legs up or very purposely showing him walk a few steps? I think he's implying that there's a connection with crippled Bran, but I don't think there is. But what do you think?
I don't think so. I think that this is probably more a kind of an artistic direction that actually, if you rewatch the Lord of the Rings films, particularly the Fellowship of the Ring, there's one of the things that made the Nine, the Black Riders, so spooky and sinister is the fact that they focused in on just individual details like a foot or maybe just the horse's face or something like that, rather than showing them as a whole. And I think that that is just a technique that they've used again here in Game of Thrones, just to sort of show you a little bit rather than everything, so that you're actually keeping a little bit of the mystery back. We now know a lot more about the White Walkers on the show, but to start with, at least just little hints here and there revealed a whole lot more and actually kept them scarier for longer because we didn't see them all so much. So I think that's what was going on. I think it's an artistic trick rather than a deliberate mirroring of anything to do with Bran, for example. But it was a good spot.
The spookiest shot of the White Walkers for me is the one at Hardhome when it's the four horsemen up on the cliff and you just see them far away on the cliff there. That gave me the shivers, man. That was great.
Yeah, that's quite getting into sort of cinematography here, but that's quite a Kubrickian. I don't know if there's a word, but Stanley Kubrick style, making people seem less than human by looking at them from a long way away or from different angles. He does this a huge amount. If you look at Stanley Kubrick films, at the beginning of The Shining, there's the shot from way up above of the car winding its way through the mountains, or you get in 2001 you see Dave there being viewed by Hal from above in a way that makes him look non-human. I'm going off. I'm digressing a little bit.
You are. Look, there's four more super chats, but this one is right up my alley. So I'm going to read this one. This is from Isabel Luisa Pinto. And she says, in your opinion, is there a distinctive single female hero in A Song of Ice and Fire, or there's a set of female characters who are heroes in their own right? So there's several things that I want to say about this. I'll say them really quickly. The Nissa Nissa Moon Maiden figure is an archetype. And even though she is sort of killed at the beginning of her arc, she is a hero. And I think that the sort of undead goddess figures that we see connected to the Weirwood, or the ghostly goddess figures like Lady Stoneheart, Ghost of Highheart, and even Melisandre in some respects, represent like this idea of Nissa Nissa after she's dead or undead. And there's a whole thing with that. Night's Queen is an interesting archetype where you might even say Ice Queen. There's a lot of Ice Queen characters. Visenya, Sansa once she gets to the Eyrie, Cersei at times even, of course, Lyanna and Jane Poole and people like that. So that's a cool archetype. And then I'll also say that the last hero is a gender fluid archetype. And we see both people like Daenerys and Arya with all the last hero symbolism, as well as Jon or someone like Davos or Sam. So to me, and a lot of the last hero characters, they get sort of gender bending language applied to them. Like Jon's called a man-made a couple of times. Arya poses as a boy a bunch. So there's a bunch of stuff like that. And even Dany takes the title Khal and makes it Khaleesi. And she's a female Khal, basically. She's not a queen. She's a female king, essentially. So, yeah. That's hope that scratches the itch for you, Isabel.
I think that's an excellent answer. I think I would only add, as is often the way when LML and I are doing this, he comes very much from a kind of thematic or sort of archetype perspective. I come a lot more from the sort of the character and plot driven approach. So the only thing I would add on to that is in the actual story that we have of A Song of Ice and Fire, George R. R. Martin, I think, quite deliberately is drawing out individual characters that are interesting sort of heroes or protagonists in their own right, regardless of gender. But what I would draw out is that he clearly has I don't know quite exactly how to put it, but there is a movement in A Song of Ice and Fire, which we've seen on the show, where we started when all of the heads of the main houses were male, and the shift has happened to become where they're all female. And that I would also reflect on Fire and Blood. If you've read it, I'm sure you picked up the same as me, is that the amount of female characters, Targaryens, who nearly were or should have been or actually were but would never remember it as history as rulers is astonishing. I counted 8 or 9 without even trying. We talk about Aegon the king, but the other two, Visenya and Rhaenys, they ruled when he was away. They ruled from the Iron Throne themselves. You get Arya, who was heir to the throne. You get characters who were there acting as regent. You get characters who sit on the Iron Throne for ages, but just get erased from history as one of the rulers. So there are many characters there who should have been rulers and weren't. And I think that kind of frustration is actually reaching some kind of thematic resolution in A Song of Ice and Fire. But really good question. We should quickly get on to that. We had some other ones. Higa Herga, thank you so much again for the chance to say your wonderful name. No question tonight, just the usual cash and a little extra since I'm having issues with Patreon. Well, I'm sorry to hear you're having problems with Patreon, but thank you. That's very kind for the super chat here. Klaus Richter, 20 euros. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if the question fits into this live stream. I asked a question on Patreon. Maybe you want to answer it. I'm not sure I saw that one. It's possible with Patreon sometimes if people put them up just before the live stream that I don't quite catch them, but I will answer that one on Patreon tomorrow, if that's okay, Klaus. Leanna Tarstock, thank you so much. Question is above about the cycle Bran could be in. If it's above, if you can find it. Love your channel. Happy Valentine's to you both. Well, thank you very much. Happy Valentine's back to you. Could you, LML, have a quick look for the question that is above while I quickly try and get on to...
After Klaus...
Oh, you found it? Okay.
After Klaus, it was Leanna Tarstark who says, question is... oh, that's the one you just... I'm sorry. So the next one is...
Well, she was referring on to a question somewhere else, which I was just wondering if you could find it for me. But don't worry, we'll find it in just one moment. Higa Herga, get another one. Thank you so much. Saying, okay, I lied. I do have a question. The first symbol that the White Walkers make in the snow matches the design in the brooch, clip, or pin that is seen across Westeros. Possible connection, something forgotten. This is very much a show thing. They're using the designs. My view, and I don't know, LML, whether you've got any thoughts on this, but they seem to use two designs. One of them, which is that kind of like circle with the line through it, and another one, which is the kind of the spiral. Spiral clearly reflects in the show the pattern of the standing stones where the first White Walker was created. So that is them sending a message to say, this is why we're coming. We remember why we were created, and that's the message they're sending out. The first one, I have a heretical theory that actually not so much thought went into that. This was the pilot. They were just creating a cool symbol because they saw that there were symbols in the books that they were left with the dead. So I personally don't think there was so much thought in that. But there are some excellent videos out there on what that symbol might mean that, if I remember, I will put down in the description later. Did you have any thoughts on that kind of a symbol?
Well, I will just direct anyone who's interested to the video I did on History of Westeros called Caverns of Dragonglass, and we did it right after the HBO episode where they showed us all the cool cave paintings at Dragonstone. And we basically spent 3 hours dissecting all the symbols in that cave, and we also touched on the ones that the White Walkers make. I don't even remember what we determined about that, but we got into it pretty deep. So I would that's on History of Westeros' channel if you want to check that out.
Excellent. I would highly recommend pretty much anything that History of Westeros and LML do together. It's bound to be good. So Leanna Tarstock, I'm afraid I can't find the question you're referring to, but you're asking about the cycle Bran could be in if what we were talking about was right. So yeah, I think that it's entirely possible, if you take that theory that we were talking about a moment ago, that Bran could be stuck in some kind of loop in the same way that Hodor is. So I think he is going to go back and try and influence time in some way, and that will create a closed loop. I do not think it's necessarily going to be quite as tragic as Hodor's was. I found that incredibly affecting, but it may well create him locked into his own time loop, if that makes sense. So he is effectively going around and around it in the same way that Hodor is. But the slight tweak I would put on that is that when you're going through the weirwood net, it's actually the way that weirwoods view time is not as this kind of linear construct, but it's all in the same moment in time. They do not experience time in the same way. So it's actually as if it's always now. And that is the key to what is going on with Hodor, is that he's saying Hodor because he is always, in one sense, experiencing that moment, that he is always in the now of holding the door, which is why his brain is so frazzled by it and why he just keeps on repeating this thing. So there is a level of tragedy in there that is above and beyond even what we just saw on the screen.
Thank you for pointing that out, Robert. That was good.
An absolute pleasure.
It is. Well, I mean, it's really sad. It really is sad, but it's sometimes the stuff that Martin does is a little bit subtle, and you have to take a minute to appreciate what's actually happening.
Yes, exactly. There's an awful lot going on there, and I think I said it earlier, but what I would say is that perhaps the fact is that the Hodor reveal is actually not the big reveal. This is just a showing something is possible so that Bran can do something even bigger in the future. Jack Hurst, thank you so much for the £5 even. Carrying on the donation train. Love you both. Love the stubbles. And especially love the term gender bending. I think that was an LML one, so a bit of love for that. And that Baratheon girl, £10. Thank you so much. There is more evidence for the power of the old gods or Lord of Light in terms of power in Planetos, evidenced by the text. Do you find it strange that the most identified religion, Faith of the Seven, is the weakest? No, I don't find it strange, and I think that it's set up as an established religion. That's the way it's done. It is there as a kind of a power rather than a sort of a physical earthly power. This is rather than any kind of magical power. That doesn't mean that there are no hints of magic involved in that whatsoever, but I don't think that the religions per se are the cause of the magic. We talked about magic LML in great depth over on, I think it was in Between Two Weirwoods, wasn't it, when we were talking with a couple of other guys. But yeah, I don't personally think that the religion aspect is what is actually the root cause of the magic. So it doesn't surprise me, I have to say. Anything to add on that one?
No, probably not. But I do see Chrissy of Oldstones found that Tarstark question, which was the three-eyed raven told Bran he'll reclaim what was lost. I think that's a TV show one. Is that a figure of speech or literal? I'm not really sure. You know, in the books, it's more like he loses his ability to walk and gains the ability to fly instead, which really, of course, means, you know, astral projection. Yeah. But I'm not really sure about the rest of it.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. In terms of reclaiming what he lost, is he lost his ability to move around, and he regained it because he can now travel beyond the weirwoods. He can go anywhere. The flying thing, we overlook it, but he does. He flies. He wogs into birds all the time now, and so he is indeed actually literally flying. So yeah, I think that's what it is. I think it was just I'd go for quite a plain text reading of that one, I have to say.
People are telling me they can't see me. I don't know if they mean that they can't. Do you have the screen locked on yourself, maybe, or?
I don't think so, but I will
Because
just have a quick look.
I should be visible.
Um,
I don't know if people are seeing my
should be.
you're seeing my
Now we
logo.
can, they say. Okay, if you talk.
Oh, okay. Well, my logo is good looking, so you can't complain that much. I mean,
Okay, people can see you again now, so this is good.
Right.
Wherever you went, you're back. Okay, let's go back to a couple of questions from my patrons. Catherine Bassett, actually, this was a super chat from earlier on. I said we'd pick up, saying the last hero ventured beyond the wall with his pals and a dog. Was the dog Ghost or the Hound in Bran's Groundhog Day's life? This is picking up, I think, on the theory that we were discussing earlier, that it was telling the story of himself. Yes, in that, if we accept that theory, then indeed him going north, I think, would probably be with his own dog, with Summer. So that would be the story he would be telling. But I don't personally buy into this. I can't remember if I actually specifically said that, but I don't personally buy into that per se. I think that maybe he could go back and say some stories, but I don't think he's actually going back and inhabiting anything in the past. So yeah, it could be any of those things, but if he's going to tell a story of himself going north with a dog, he's going to be telling the story of himself going north with his own direwolf, I personally think. Let's move on to a slightly broader concept of what the Age of Heroes' nature or purpose is within the narrative. Karuna Timkova says, would it really matter if every story set in the Age of Heroes were just a legend? Analogous stories in real life don't exist as documentary fact. They are ways to understand the human condition or organize societies. And so Bran the Builder or Lan the Clever or whatever, they're archetypes to help define the priorities or collective character of respective families. That is something I absolutely subscribe to, certainly in our world. This is legends and stories that are passed down for generations. They help shape communities, but they also reflect the feelings and desires and wants of particular communities and particular times. There's a fascinating study you can do if you're ever bored of an evening, is to look back at just in the last 100 years or so of Robin Hood films, and you can see the character of the Western world reflected in what each incarnation of Robin Hood is. When you've got Kevin Costner or Russell Crowe, or you go right back to sort of Errol Flynn or whoever it was, there it's a reflection of how Western culture views itself, as well as a way of shaping Western culture. What's your view on that kind of interplay, and how it might, or how George R.R. Martin might be using that in his created world?
Well, gee whiz, man, that's like, I'm actually going to drop a link in the chat right now that's under the methodology tab on the front page of my website. I've written about this a lot, and this is basically a Joseph Campbell question. This gets into the purpose of mythology. Joseph Campbell talked about a fourfold functioning of myth. There's a metaphysical function, which is awakening a sense of awe before the mystery of being. And his quote about this is, mythological symbols touch and exhilarate centers of life beyond the reach of reason and coercion. The first function of mythology is to reconcile waking consciousness to the awe-inspiring mystery of the universe as it is. And then there's the cosmological function, which kind of dovetails with that. Anything that's a cosmology means it's explaining the universe, explaining the shape of the universe. And so for pre-modern societies, myth functions as a kind of proto-science and offers explanations for physical phenomena that surround and affect their lives. And so you have a storm god, god of the flood, et cetera, et cetera. These are the forces that, drive everything. The cycle of the seasons, plants and animals that are important to a given people's lifetime. The third function is a sociological function, which means it's validating and supporting the existing social order. This is what you were just touching on. That's a pretty obvious one. Ancient societies had to conform to an existing social order if they wanted to survive at all. This is because they evolved under pressure from necessities much more intense than the ones encountered in our modern world. And so mythology confirmed that order and enforced it by reflecting it into the stories themselves, often describing how the order arrived from divine intervention. Campbell often referred to these conformity myths as the right-hand path to reflect the brain's left hemisphere's abilities for logic, order, and linearity. Together with these myths, however, he observed the existence of the left-hand path, mythic patterns like the hero's journey, which are revolutionary in character in that they demand from the individual a surpassing of social norms, and sometimes even of morality. That's something that George is playing with a lot. And then there's the pedagogical function, which is just guiding the individual through the stages of life. And so you have myths for, the various transitions. So to answer the question more specifically, I think that in the real world, mythology is almost always rooted in real events, but it's transformed and mythicized and imbued with the values of the culture and the idea of personifying natural forces as gods, the storm god and whatnot. And so at the root of it, you may have, like we're talking about Land the Clever. Now, we don't know Forrest talking about the great lions of the West as one of these magical beasts that are disappearing and going out of the world, along with the dire wolves and the unicorns and the other magical animals. So the idea that there used to be skin changers really is alive. And the idea that there is some Lannister history with taming lions or having a bond with lions, we know that that's very possible. So I think in Song of Ice and Fire, it's you shouldn't think about the myths as being true or false. They're true in various senses. And Joseph Campbell also talks about this true. Like when you're thinking about religion, religion isn't necessarily to be thought of as literally true and false. That's not really the value of reading a spiritual book. It's more about these sort of cosmological and sociological functions. And so I think that is the value of these myths. But we also have to consider that this is a fantasy story, and we're specifically trying to solve puzzles and riddles about history, because we know that the last long night and the new long night have a lot to do with each other. And if we want to figure out how do we solve the new long night, it probably would help to know how we beat back the others the last time. And so we are led to believe that there are kernels of truth for sure in the most important old legends. We just need to understand that they're transformed and mythicized, and we have to wonder and sift through it and figure out what might be literal and what might not be, and maintain a sense of doubt and not get too sure about anything. So how's that, Robert?
I think that's a wonderfully all-encompassing reply. You picked up on a couple of points from a couple of my patrons that I didn't read out yet, but John St. Baptiste, hi there. He's got a great channel. If you love music, please do go and check that out. He talks about the development of identity as being part of myths and legends. And is the age of heroes, is it the telescoping of a real person to justify culture's identity? I think you were talking about that. And also Charity K is talking about the legends of the age of heroes as stories told for the justifications for the noble families to rule. Again, I think there's an element of that. So there are a couple of bits here that I would just sort of emphasize. I don't think I've got much to add here, but clearly there is a kernel of truth in all of these stories. There is something that started the story. There is another layer which George R. R. Martin has had, which is this kind of like thematic layer that we can look to the past to understand the future, because there are lots of echoes between characters in the past and characters in the present. And thirdly, how have, in practical terms, because he has a well-rounded world, how have these legends been used to build the culture in some way, to justify some things, to reflect other things? So there's a few different elements going on there. This is what makes it such a great narrative, is the fact that we're not just looking at a story that is completely true or completely false. It has many layers. There are some kernels of truth in it. It has definitely been changed over time. We should look at it for thematic things as well as specific things. Maura Lee, thank you so much for your second super chat. Actually, you did one before we went live. $25, that's very kind, saying for LML, love the costume. He's got a great costume going on today, LML. And then we've got another super chat from B1 Mary, another $25. Thank you so much. This is for The Well Told Tale, which is my second channel, if you don't know. I will talk about that in just one moment, but been enjoying your readings and just wanted to say thank you for the stories and your weekly live chats as well as your videos. Thanks for all you do, Robert. Thank you so much. That's very kind. I will take this as an opportunity to take the little break I often do just to let people know what's going on in my little empire. So The Well Told Tale, as we were talking about, that's my second channel, where it's an audio narration channel. I just read one episode a week of what I consider to be the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever written. We've literally just now finished The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft. It was a three-parter. Apologies if you were expecting the last part yesterday. I only managed to get it out today, but it is now out. That was a fantastic story. Next week, we're going to go on to some Edgar Allan Poe, which I'm really looking forward to as well. In terms of my channel, my main channel, this is in Deep Geek, where you are now. I've got a few things coming up. First of all, I've started, or I will very soon start, a series of videos with Gemma from Secrets of the Citadel. We're going to be looking at some of the more intriguing but often under-investigated houses in Westeros. So we're going to do one a week on her channel and my channel, alternating where they are. They're going to be podcast style. And we started out looking at House Mormont this time. Next week, we're going to be looking at House Hightower. The other ones on my channel are going to be House Velaryon and House Reed. I think are three of the most fascinating ones there. In terms of my big series about Robert's Rebellion, the Tower of Joy, we're starting to wind it up now. I've got a video. I'm aiming to get it out this Sunday, which is my take. I thought I couldn't go through this without doing a video on it. My take on all the evidence for R plus L equals J, because I know that there are still people who think it's not true, who doubt it, who think there are problems with it. I am a subscriber to R plus L equals J. I think LML is as well. And so what I wanted to do was just set out in one video why I think that's the case and why other things aren't the case. But LML, what are you up to? What would you direct people to in your channel?
Oh, I'm just over here waiting for your RLJ video, man. That's all I ever do. No, I've done the last 2 weeks we've done stuff about the Green Men and the Isle of Faces, and in fact, I'm going to mention a couple of things from that research a little bit later when we get the chance today, because it has to do with the Hammer of the Waters and all that stuff. But those are called Sacred. My other, just like you, Robert, I have 2 YouTube channels. And my second one is called Between Two Weirwoods. And if you're searching for it, remember to use the number 2, Between Two Weirwoods. And this Sunday, it's going to be a Sansabration. People are telling me we're glitching.
We're back now. We can keep going.
Okay, so yeah, as soon as I try to promote. So guys, the channel is... I have a second YouTube channel, just like Robert. It's called Between Two Weirwoods with a number 2. And I see the link being dropped in the chat there by Chrissy of Old Stones and Jojo Lady Dane. And this Sunday, it's going to be a Sansabration. I'm going to have Wendy Nerd, Eliana from Girls Gone Canon, Sansa Snark from Watchers on the Wall, and Sanrixian. And we're basically going to go through some of Sansa's underrated and underappreciated awesome moments where she either shows kindness or some high character or a little bit of spunk, a little bit of sass. She does a lot of stuff that's kind of underrated and easy to miss in a book full of dragons and flaming swords and zombies and all the rest. So Sansa's arc is a great example of a lot of George's more subtle writing. And just like I was alluding to earlier, sometimes you really got to stop and just appreciate what's going on and think about it a little harder. And you realize, wow, there's a lot going on here. So Sansa's a great character. To make that point, and we're basically just going to spend a couple hours highlighting all the stuff that maybe you've missed where, you know, Sansa's pretty awesome. So that's what we're doing this Sunday.
Excellent. And I would highly recommend you do go and check out both of those channels. You've also got podcasts and website and lots of other things that I'm sure there will be links over in the live chat, and I'll make sure that they're down in the description as well. While I remember, as you mentioned it, thank you to my amazing moderators. I think I've seen both Jojo and Chrissy there in the chat. Thank you. I really appreciate it. It just makes the whole thing work really smoothly. So guys, if you're in the chat, could you just give them a bit of love? And the other thing that I always say at this stage is a big thank you to my patrons. I honestly can't do this without your support, and I'm hugely appreciative of it. Thank you. If you are interested in supporting the channel, getting access to some extra stuff I do for my patrons, there's a few extra benefits as well, things like getting a chance to have your questions answered on here, and a chance to influence what I do in terms of future videos. My patrons decided on that series that I'm doing with Secrets of the Citadel, for example. Do go and check it out. There's a link down in the description. Let's quickly, we've had a couple of super chats while we've been talking. There was one from the Disputed Lands, Amanda, who is responsible for the wonderful tuxedo that you can see being displayed by the fine LML there, spread tightly across his manly chest. So Disputed Lands, thank you so much. Word of the day, I'm going to mispronounce this, I'm sure. Euhemerism is the historical theory of mythology based on the assumption that myths and legends are based on real-world events. That's a great word. I'm going to be Googling that afterwards and then seeing what I can get from it. I do love a little bit of mythology. Catherine Bassett has a question, £10. Thank you so much. This is a moon meteor question. Well, we've managed a whole hour with LML without mentioning moon meteors. Why don't I just throw this one over to you? If a moon meteor hit Ashai and over time the black oily stone made its way to Westeros, did it start to corrupt not just the weirwoods, but the prophecies, stories, and tales too? Go.
Yes, and so we've actually been chatting this out. At first, I wasn't quite sure what she was getting at, but essentially, the idea is that the Bloodstone Emperor was said to worship a black stone that fell from the sky. And this information comes at the end of a list of 7 like abominable sins that he committed, like necromancy, torture, slavery, the dark arts, and he also worshipped a black stone that fell from the sky. So it's very much a Lovecraft element, and in Lovecraft, frequently those kinds of meteors they harbor a hostile intelligence, or they just corrupt and poison the land, like in The Color Out of Space, which is going to be a Nicolas Cage movie very soon. I'm Nicolas Cage. I was speaking one voice. In that movie, the meteor falls and basically starts turning the land into gray ash all around it, and it radiates outward and just kills everything. And I definitely think that is what happened to Ashai. That's why it's all shadowed. That's why it's all messed up, is there's a meteor somewhere in there, probably like, the Stygia, the corpse city, where they've got the meteor temple there and all that. So the idea is that the Bloodstone Emperor turned to darkness and evil, or at least the character in this story. And worshiping the meteor could have well been part of that. It's very possible that the meteor was corrupting his brain, it was poisoning him, or its dark magic was leaking into his mind. It might have even harbored some sort of Lovecraftian being inside of it or something like that. All that is in play. It's at least implied. So when you talk about corrupting the myths, I definitely think Azor Ahai is the main myth where the story got twisted around. I think Azor Ahai is a bad guy. He's stabbing his wife and breaking the moon. So this is a villain, at least at the beginning, in my opinion, and he's presented to us as a hero. And it gets into the whole idea of, can you morally justify blood magic, which I think the answer is supposed to be no. And the Azor Ahai myth is trying to trick you into thinking that maybe that is necessary. So I think that sort of twisting of the myth goes right back to Bloodstone Emperor, and maybe that happened from the meteor. So there's that answer.
Awesome. And guys, I'm going to try and get LML onto the channel to do one of my my favorite theory videos, where we just dig into his basic theory of magic and moon meteors and the rest of it, because he comes on here and sort of gives little bits of it, but I think it'd be really good for people just to hear in slightly more detail what that is. Just a couple of quick shout outs in the chat. couldn't resist just mentioning Girl Nettles, who's said a message on a date on Valentine's Day, and apparently it's rude to live stream, so she's gone. So, well, it probably is rude to be watching a live stream if you're on a date, but I hope it goes well. Alana Prestane of Bravos saying, or questioning that I did one on a video on House Mormont. That is going to be on Gemma's channel, Secrets of the Citadel. We're going to alternate the video, so one goes on hers and the next one comes on mine. I don't know whether it's gone live yet on hers. I think it should do at some point today. But yeah, so that one's coming up on her channel. We had a couple of other ones. So Richard Hop, $10. Thank you so much. Is there a special significance to there must always be a Stark in Winterfell? Yes, I did a whole video on this one. Also, I think this ties into a couple of videos I did recently about the Stark dead as well. For me, as is the way that we were talking a moment ago with sort of myths and legends and things, there's a few different layers to this. One of them is probably a very practical one, that it helps reinforce the Stark claim to the north. But also on a slightly deeper level, I personally believe, certainly in the books, not necessarily on the show, what we're looking at in the crypt of Winterfell is the Stark dead being turned and held ready, waiting to be raised as an army. And I think that that is what is going on, is that there will always be a Stark in Winterfell, because the Starks must always be buried in Winterfell. So I think that that is what is going on there. And this ties into what we were talking about earlier, in that the Starks almost certainly have got some connection or relation to the start of this whole thing, the start of the White Walkers and the Night's King and things along those lines. So yes, I think there are several layers to this. LML, did you have a sort of a quick take on the there must always be a Stark in Winterfell?
Not a specific one. I'm still trying to drill down on what that means. It has something to do with the Starks linked to the others and the crypts and all that stuff, but I don't have any more specific. I don't want to just ramble about it. So I enjoyed your video, and I might get around to that one eventually. But let's, we've got several super chats, so let's keep going with these.
Okay, we got Sword in the Darkness, thank you so much, saying something that has puzzled me is, if the first men used bronze and the Andals brought iron, how can they have iron swords in the crypt of Winterfell?
Oh, yeah. Let me take a stab at it, Robert, and then you tell me what you think. So I think that essentially what's going on here is there's a little bit of a misconception about the delineation between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age in real-world history. See, there's a big difference between iron and steel. And what the Andals really had was steel. And the thing is that sometimes in the books, the words iron and steel are used interchangeably by people who don't know the difference, really. But there's a very important difference because steel is basically very, very highly refined iron with a little bit of carbon added in and various other things that go on. But the point is, to make steel, you have to have forges that are capable of going very, very high temperatures. And to even make such a forge is difficult. And so people had the ability to make low-grade iron for centuries and even a couple of millennia before we actually gained the ability to make steel. And so basically, when you only have low-grade iron, bronze is still a better weapon for the most part. It's better for swords and spear tips and all that stuff. So all throughout the Bronze Age, there was, or at least the latter part of the Bronze Age, there was iron, but it was low-grade iron. And so it wasn't until iron refining quality got to the point where we basically had steel that it totally replaced the bronze weapons and armor. And there's also a lot of overlap. So when you look at things like the iron swords in the crypts of the Kings of Winter, this is probably not really even a combat sword, but more of a talisman, because we see these rumors that maybe the others don't like iron and fire. And so iron seems to be, has a little bit of a spiritual quality, some people think. And so to me, the idea of laying an iron sword across the lap, even though it rusts away, it's the material, it's the magical talisman property of it. So the other thing about that is the Iron Islands have been known for mining their iron ore since probably before the Andals came. So there is iron running around. It's just not very good iron. And that's why the Andals That's why the First Men only had bronze weapons when the Andals invaded. Robert, what do you think about all that?
I think that's an excellent answer. I think the only thing I would add is that traditions can change over time, and it may well be a very practical answer to that, because they could have started doing with the weapons that they had at the time, and when they got better weapons, they improved the quality of the weapon that they left down there going through time, and so that might be something as simple as that. But I think my answer was boring and yours was much more well-rounded, so we'll go with that. Klaus Richter, €10, saying, I'd really appreciate it if you could answer my Patreon question today. I've just had a go back and I've now spotted that, and that actually helpfully ties into where I was going to go next, which is the others and the Night's King. Now, the question there from Klaus was there a Night King in the Long Night? The legends mention many facts, the others, dead horses, ice spiders, and other things, but no Night King. Wouldn't he be the one you remember the best? So I know that LML has many thoughts on this subject, and so I will just start off by saying I think we need to be clear that there are two people here, two characters. We're talking about the Night King, who's a character on the show, and the Night's King, who is a legendary character that's referenced in the books. Now, the names are similar enough that they're probably quite similar in terms of their roles in the sort of the books and the show crossover, but what we're talking about, I think, is that the Night King per se is going to be a bit like the Night's King. The Night's King, I know, LML, you think probably was actually during the period of the Long Night. And so what we've got there is this character and a legend that reflects his presence. Now, I think I will stop there and let you explain that a little bit more. But my headline is that I think that there is in the books this character, but we've got him by just a slightly different name. But you've thought more about this than I have.
Yeah. So essentially, I think that George has a lot of fun with, playing with the history. Like, he doesn't give us the exact events of the Long Night straight up. He twists them around and, hides them and shrouds them in the fog of history. I mean, he loves the fog of history. It's very clear that Martin loves it. He loves it on a short time frame. A time scale, and he loves it on a long time scale. So I think that we're supposed to look at all of these legends and question each part individually. And the way that I tend to sort them out is by symbolism and narrative sense. And so when you look at the Night's King myth, it starts with the idea of Night's King and Night's Queen sacrificing to the others. So what is sacrificing to the others? Well, Craster shows us what that means. It means giving your children to the others, which they then either turn into others, or maybe they harvest the life force to make new others. We don't know exactly how it happens in the book. The show gives us, the finger to the baby's eye, but we still don't know if the baby has to go to White Walker daycare for 14 years or whatever, or if he just sort of grows up into a White Walker. I suspect in the books, Robert, it's more like harvesting the baby's energy, more like a sacrifice to make a new White Walker. But whatever it is,
it's definitely to do with that sound effect. That's the one.
In any case, it's kind of like the Transformers symbol that goes on. But essentially, what sacrificing to the others means giving your children to the others to make more others. Or we could just say simply that it means making others. The interesting difference between Night's King and Night's Queen and Craster and all of his wives and daughter wives is that none of Craster's wives have skin as cold as ice and eyes like blue stars. So with Night's King, even if Night's King is a regular dude, which he could be a magical dude as well, Night's Queen is clearly a magical figure. So we've got the idea of giving babies to be made into others or creating others. But the fact that the Night's Queen seems like this icy other woman or ice priestess or icy undead woman or something like that makes me think that this might be the original story of creating the others. And without going into too much detail, the symbolism tends to back that up. And there's a really interesting parallel here. So Melisandre, she takes Stannis's seed and life fires, and she creates shadow babies, right?
Yeah.
She talks about like Stannis's fires are burning low. I can't draw off anymore to make another son. So she's basically pulling from his life fires, taking his seed and soul, making black shadows, shadow babies with it. Now, Night's Queen was said to, Night's King rather, gave his seed and soul to Night's Queen, and then they gave their children to the others, which basically means they made white shadows. So there's a really good parallel between Night's Queen taking Night's King's seed and soul and making white shadow others, and Melisandre taking Stannis's seed and soul and making the black shadow babies. And of course, Stannis parallels Night's King in a lot of ways. So you start crawling into that, and you start to see that this Night's King and Queen story about making others is really important and almost central. And so what I have is that either the Night's King that we heard about that lived like shortly after the Long Night is just a repeat where he's copying the original Night's King of the Long Night. And maybe there's been multiple people that have sacrificed to the others. And in that sense, you could almost say that Craster could be a new Night's King if he wanted to try to take power, perhaps. Or it could be that the story of the Night's King that was the 13th Lord Commander is actually the story that happened during the Long Night. And that number 13 is a more symbolic number. And he's not actually the 13th Lord Commander. And people have come up with ideas like maybe 12 Lord Commanders died during the war against the others. And so the 13th Lord Commander actually did live during the Long Night, but he was the 13th Lord Commander. Or maybe it was the last hero that turned into Night's King, and he called himself the 13th in honor of the 12 friends of his that died. So there's a lot of clever ways that that 13th Lord Commander thing could be slightly less literal than we think. And this is exactly the sort of detail that we shouldn't be too certain about. 8,000 years ago, you know, we're trying to determine the exact order of Lord Commanders on the Night's Watch. Like that's lost to the fog of history. So there's a lot more to it, and I would recommend the series called Moons of Ice and Fire on my website if you're interested in this line of stuff. It's really, there's too much to try to summarize quickly. But the essence of it, Robert, if I could sum it up, is that the show is actually revealing the book truth here. When they show us Night's King as a big bad, and they show us the Children of the Forest creating the Night's King, who then probably started the Long Night shortly after that, that's very close to the book truth. It's actually closer than the legend that we're given, because Night's King stuff, that all went down essentially with the Long Night. And I think we'll get that confirmed in the books pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with the vast majority of that. I think that's a really helpful kind of summary of it. So, Klaus, I hope that answered your question there. Linda Prosuta, thank you so much. $25, very generous. Saying, no question, enjoying the live stream. Thanks for all you both do. You're very welcome. Thank you. And Amanda Duncan, thank you. Saying, just wanted to say how awesome you both are. Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. And then we had one more, which is from, if I quickly get there, Nine Nichols. Thank you so much. Saying the first men had dragon steel before the Andals came. Yeah, this is from a sort of a throwaway line from Sam about, I think it was from Sam anyway, about the last hero who used dragon steel. I don't want to get into this too much because the hint is that this is Valyrian steel. One thing I would just sort of reflect on, and I've not thought about this in any great detail, but it's something that we've been getting from the sort of the pre-hype for the Long Night, or whatever it's going to be called, the prequel that's going to be coming out, and also a couple of things George R. R. Martin has said recently, is that the timing of the rise of the Valyrian Empire seems to be about the same time as the Long Night, which actually adds in a whole new element of actually ice versus fire happening back then as well, and opens up the possibility of Valyrian steel even earlier than we sort of see it around Westeros at the moment. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff there to unpack. I don't think it was widespread, is the short version. There might well have been one or two bits of dragon steel, Valyrian steel around and about, but it wasn't mass produced in any way, shape, or form. So they wouldn't, therefore, I think, be putting them across the laps of dead Starks, for example.
Yeah, anyone that knows me knows that I would say that the source of what seems like Valyrian steel during the Long Night actually comes from the great empire of the Dawn, who would be the original people from Ashai, the people from the Shadow that tamed dragons before the Valyrians that Septon Barth, wonders about. And of course, everyone knows, I think the Great Empire of the Dawn video is on History of Westeros' channel. That's one that me and History of Westeros did together. And basically, that's the very simple version, is that there were dragons in Ashai before Valyria ever existed and before the Long Night. And the Great Empire of the Dawn is just the name for these ancient Ashai people. There's very strong evidence that they came to Westeros, namely, Robert, that fused stone fortress at Old Town, which is underneath the High Tower. It's almost certain to date back to before the Long Night. And since it's made out of fused black stone, it really can only have been made by dragon lords. And that is essentially one of the most important pieces of evidence about this that exists. So I don't think it was Valyria, but at the end of the day, it's not even that important. They're just dragon. There was a few dragon lords in Westeros before the Long Night. It's one of the secrets that's hiding in the lore. And it's one of the reasons why Azor Ahai even matters at all, because why would this myth of Azor Ahai and dragons from far eastern Ashai have shit to do with the White Walkers and the others and the Starks in the north? Well, the answer is that Azor Ahai came to Westeros and he was from Ashai, and so there's a history there. So that's what I think. Yeah. But just as what you said, the dragon steel would have been limited, only a few magical blades, certainly not a lot of them.
Yeah, I agree. Klaus Richter, just to pick up on your comment there in the chat, the question I was answering just then about the Night King, whether there was a Night King in the Long Night, that was the one that we've just been answering. If there was another question you left on Patreon, then I will go and come to that tomorrow and reply to that one tomorrow. As we're talking about the others, I had a couple of other questions from my patrons. Daisy Lancaster is talking about, in the Bible, the fallen angels who came down to earth in 2 Peter, or in 2 Peter, it said that God put them in Tartarus, chaining them up to be in darkness until Judgment Day. Do you think that the White Walkers or the others could be a kind of a reflection or representation of that, that they're in spiritual darkness rather than a literal place?
Yes.
The first White Walkers be green seers who betrayed the nature of the old magic? Well, you can hear LML is clearly very much in agreement in this. Yes, I think that there is definitely an element of at least the first of the White Walkers being a green seer. So he's got this kind of flip version of, if you look at Bran's powers, he's got this kind of, Bran can warg into the living and he can warg into the dead. The Night King can warg into the dead on the show. So there's this kind of flip version of what's going on there. And I do like this idea about spiritual darkness. Darkness, silence are these kind of bits of language that are used again and again when talking about the others. So I'll let LML weigh in on that because my voice has suddenly gone very croaky.
So I absolutely think that the others, some part of the others is tied to ancient green seers, the first green seers that were essentially tied to the trees. And I think that there's a lot here, but essentially when I was just talking about Azor Ahai coming to Westeros in the Dawn Age, the point of that seems to be that Azor Ahai wanted to get his hands on the Weirwood magic, and he essentially managed to invade the Weirwood net. And it seems as though he poisoned it or altered it or changed it so that he could access their power. And there's a lot of stuff about Azor Ahai sacrificing green men. And you might think of Stannis killing Renly with the Shadow Baby, for example. Renly is the ultimate green man. He wears the green armor and the stag antlers. He's sacrificed in a ritual throat cut kind of move by essentially the shadow version of Azor Ahai with a shadow version of Lightbringer. And so there's a whole thing about sacrificing green men. And I think that essentially when Azor Ahai tried to get his hands on this weirwood power, he sacrificed green men or green seers, or he drove the green seers that were inside the weirwood, he drove them out and they were evicted. And that's why the others read as like these dispossessed icy elves. George even calls them icy she, and he's talking about the Aishi from Irish folklore. And they're essentially the people of the mounds. They're these sort of elf-like spirits that are tied to the mounds and the forests and nature in general. And so the others essentially, they read like very pissed off nature spirits that they've been frozen. And I read them as essentially evicted from the woods. So when it says a shadow emerged from the dark of the wood, when they're called the White Walkers of the Wood, they're essentially like the original spirits of the weirwoods that have been evicted out of their home. And I think that's why they're pissed off. And I think that's why they are opposed to fire. And I think that this important split inside the weirwoods between ice and fire is kind of right at the center of the story.
Excellent stuff. Love that. Quick question from the chat. I spotted Argian Targaryen saying, do you think Uncle Benjen is cold hands? This is one of those rare occasions where we actually can see inside the mind of George, because I don't think it's spoilery. It's so wide out there at the moment. We got an editor's note on one of his original manuscripts from when he was talking about cold hands. On the editor said, I think cold hands is Benjen. Is it Benjen? And George R. R. Martin just writes back, no. So I think that this is not, they're not, I think on the show they've merged the two characters, but in the books, I think they're going to be two separate characters. Cold hands for me has probably been around for a lot longer. I personally have a gut instinct it might be one of the Blood Raven's personal guard who went up to the wall with him, but I've got nothing other than a gut instinct to go on that one, it has to be said. Let's pick up on a couple of questions.
Can I get 60 seconds on that?
You can have 30 seconds on that.
So Cold Hands reads very much like an undead green man. The green men were said to ride elks and to be to talk to the animals and basically be skin changers and have magic powers. Cold Hands rides an elk, talks to the ravens. He may or may not be some kind of green seer or skin changer. He certainly can communicate to the ravens and probably communicate with blood ravens. So that's all very interesting. And he's specifically drawn from somebody called Herne the Hunter from British folklore, which probably, Robert, you're familiar with Herne the Hunter. Herne the Hunter is a version of the Green Man or Cernunnos who is undead. He hung himself on Herne's oak, ashamed at some sort of sin that he had committed. And then he was resurrected as a guardian of the woods, and he rides a horse and leads the wild hunt, but he himself is dead. And so Cold Hands is basically Herne the Hunter, and that's why we have like Herndon of the Horn and Harlan the Hunter as the two founders of House Tarly back on Horn Hill there. So 60 seconds.
Well, all right. I'll let you get away with that one this time.
And he might be the last hero, one of the last hero's companions. Cold Hands.
I think this is all speculation at this point, but I think the point you make about the elk is quite a valuable one. But I think that he is a bit like Benjen in this kind of frozen, not quite undead, but other life force. So the clear link for me is that he has been made by the magic of the children of the forest. So that's what's going on there, and therefore he is supportive of the children and what they're up to. Torsten D on Patreon says, the current fight against the others seems to be fought to prevent another long night. Does that mean that the others won the fight during the Age of Heroes? Was it only a coincidence that the others attacked during an especially long winter? The outcome of the fight doesn't have an effect on the length of the seasons. Or did they dominate the continent for a generation? So I think that timescales here are very vague. We know that seasons in the world of Ice and Fire, they vary hugely, and these are legends, and so we can't take literally any thoughts that we have of periods of time, but it was a very long winter that coincided with the others. The others seem to bring with them the weather at the very least. Whether that changes the climate is a really big issue that we've talked about before actually on this channel. But there clearly is a link there. Did they win? No, I do not think they did. If we accept the fact that there was a first long night, then I think that what seems to have happened there is that is when they got pushed back in some way, penned in some way, or they retreated in some way, because humanity then, otherwise humanity wouldn't be there. So the implications that humanity survived and pushed them back, that seems to be the message. Although we don't get any details, this is one of the things I find most fascinating about any of these sort of stories of how the others were defeated. We hear huge amounts about how Lightbringer, the sword, was forged. We hear lots about the journey of the last hero, but we don't actually get the story of how the battle was won, what actually happened there. But the clear implication was that they got pushed back in some way, and humanity could then, with the children of the forest, could then settle themselves in and dig in. Maura Lee says, I would like to know more about the pact made between the First Men, the Children of the Forest, and the others. If this pact was supposed to be binding, then what happens to cause the others, or the Night King, or the White Walkers to be on the attack? So the pact was just between humans and the Children of the Forest. It wasn't between them and the others. So this seems to have been a pact that they signed, to a non-aggression pact between humans and Children of the Forest, to agree not to be attacking each other, almost certainly in the face, I think, of a common threat, the common threat being the others. So we're not looking about the pact being a thing which bound the others in any way, shape, or form. This is the fact that the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of idea. It was a bit more than that, but that was what was going on there. Is there anything else you want to add on any of that?
Oh, sorry.
No? Okay, well, we'll move on then.
So this is, I love this question because she's sort of getting at one of the clues here that the history is wrong. George always leaves us clues when the history is wrong. And you're hinting at it too. The idea like of the pact, where the First Men give up whatever religions they used to have, adopt the religion of the Children of the Forest, stop killing them, even though they had military advantage up to that point. What is it that made the First Men do that? The most obvious answer is the others and the long night. That is when they would have been desperate enough to give up all their old ways. And oh, by the way, since most people died during the long night, all the old ways would essentially have been would have died with them. They would have been thrown into a post-apocalyptic world of famine and chaos. There's no food. All the power structure collapses. People start dying off after a couple of years. I mean, and then the others start invading. This is really like none of the power structures would have survived. And so this is, if the children appear with a way to help the last hero, to help the first members of the Night's Watch, this is exactly why the First Men then would have made a pact, taken up their religion, be like, yeah, we're pretty impressed with this whole Green Seer Weirwood stuff. Yeah, seems pretty potent. We'll go ahead and worship that, and so that I think is a big clue that the pact happened during the long night. And so here's the other part about the big clue about this. The Hammer of the Waters, right? What is it? We don't know, but it was some sort of catastrophe that broke the arm of Dorne. And, the clues that in the legend kind of make it sound like the Children of the Forest made an earthquake happen, essentially. And it collapsed the land and the sea came rushing in, giants awaking in the earth. However, a meteor impact would also be sufficient to do exactly what the Hammer of the Waters did, to collapse the land bridge, to cause tidal waves, such as are recorded at Storm's End in the Durrandon myth, where it records a legend of a tidal wave and a storm that was bigger than all others in recent memory that killed everyone. That is, in my opinion, a legend of the fallout of the Hammer of the Waters incident. Now, you guys know how I do it. I look at all the symbolism. So if you start looking at hammers, you see that moon meteors and thunderbolts and falling dragons and hammers are all just like this. They're like BFFs. They're going out on Valentine's Day dates all the time with each other. And so there's a lot of symbolic clues that the Hammer of the Waters was a moon meteor. One of my favorites, Robert, is that one of the Stepstone's islands is named Bloodstone. So it's like giving you a clue. It's like Bloodstone was here. Bloodstone meteors fell here. Bloodstone Emperor's black meteors that he called down, they fell here. And so then it begins to all make sense. You have the Hammer of the Waters as the fall of the long night, basically. These are the moon meteors that fell, threw up all the smoke and ash and debris, blocked out the sun behind me, blocked it out so you can't see it. And this is the fall of the long night. Shortly after this, the others are invading and humans are beat back to the brink. And then they make the pact with the first men. They form the Night's Watch and they fight back against the others. And that is what I think happened.
Yeah, I mean, I agree at a high level on that. I think I don't necessarily go with everything in terms of the Hammer of the Waters. I think Bloodstone could simply be a rock where there was a battle. I know it's boring and I know it doesn't fit in with with everything, but there are always simple solutions to these things as well. So Seneca Black, thank you so much for the super chat, saying just showing some love for two of the best content creators in the community. Thank you so much. Thanks for blowing our minds, you say. Well, you're very welcome. I want to bring this now on to House Stark, which we've been sort of talking to this subject already. James Sidney, who's a new patron, hi James, was asking about the relationship between the Starks and the Children of the Forest, or between the first men of the Children of the Forest, how this plays into what seems to be happening with the Marsh and the Wog Kings, and why the Starks seem to be anti-Children of the Forest then at some point. Quark and Tacos came out with a very similar question about the Wog Kings as well. So for those who don't know, the Starks obviously seem to have, at the beginning of their story, they seem to have some link with the Children of the Forest, because clearly the Winterfell is built around and perhaps with the Weirwood. That's a whole other arc, but it's the Weirwood seems to be a lot more entangled in Winterfell than you might at first think. Added to which we see sacrifices to the Weirwood, and when Bran's going back through the history in Winterfell, there are stories of Bran the Builder interacting with the Children of the Forest. So there seems to be quite a strong link going on there at the beginning. Then at some point later, we get the Starks over time expand their power out across the north, and you get all these stories of how they defeated different of these petty kings that there were dotted about all over the place, because the Starks weren't always in charge of all of the north. They claimed that land over time. And a couple of the places that they went, there were the Marsh Kings, who were down with the Crannogmen in the Neck, that area, and there was also the Warg Kings, who I think was sort of like off just the other side of the Wolf's Wood at Sea Dragon Point, I think it's called, that kind of area. And their stories are very similar, that the Starks sort of fought them and all pretty much ended their line, but then married into it, like the daughters of the last king, they married into the family. So the question here is, why did the Starks shift from being very pro Children of the Forest to being apparently anti them? Because there are strong links with obviously the Warg Kings connection with the old magic, and the Marsh Kings, the Crannogmen and people have a strong connection with the Children of the Forest. I will give the very mundane answer. I suspect LML will have a far more exciting answer to this one. My mundane answer is that the North is supposed to remember, but the North does not remember. The Starks, over time, the Children of the Forest sort of diminished, and there were fewer and fewer of them. So they got forgotten. The old ways got forgotten. The Starks then became wanting to control all of the North, and it was just a matter of, this happened over centuries and millennia. They just slowly forgot about the histories and the things they were supposed to remember. So it's not that they were anti the Children of the Forest, it's just that the old links just got lost over time. But LML, did you have a different take on all of that?
Slightly, not terribly different. But I do think that the Warg King is actually a clue about a phenomenon which would have been skin changer kings. Varamir Sixskins is another clue. The way that Varamir sets himself up as a little bit of a petty local tyrant, where he's using his animals to force women to come to his cave and have his children. And he essentially lives, and then, heroes come and try to kill him as if he was a dragon, and they fail, of course, because he has beasts and he's a beast master. And Varamir is he's very low cunning. Okay, so if you take someone like Varamir Sixskins and give his abilities to somebody more powerful, then you can see why you would have had warg kings. It makes sense. And the original Starks probably were warg kings, I would say. Then we have the Marsh King in the Neck, where it says that they chose their kings based on the Green Seer gifts. So if somebody manifested Skin Changer or Green Sight or Green Seer powers, they would actually take that person and make them, quote, first among equals, but they're still called a king. And then we've got Weirwood Thrones. You've got the Oaken Seat of the Gardeners. And basically, I think George is implying that in the Age of Heroes and in the Dawn Age, once mankind got their hands on the Skin Changer powers, you would have had some Skin Changers and Green Seers who naturally set themselves up as petty kings and tyrants and warlords. And their power would have been fearsome to behold. Imagine Bran up in the tower at Queen's Crown, okay? He sees Jon outside with the wildlings. And this is one little boy, one Skin Changer with one wolf. And he savages their entire crew and helps Jon to break free. So if you think about powerful Skin Changers with lots of wolves, this would be a terrifying force. And just knowing the dark side of human nature, some of these people would have been kings. And so I think we actually had more than one warg king, including the Stark.
I would agree. I think that that those powers were a lot more widespread than they are in the current day of A Song of Ice and Fire. Chuck G, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, any chance Ned is alive and plotting? I have a short answer to that and a slightly longer one. My short answer is no. I don't think that there is a chance. My slightly longer answer on it is, if you take it, and I completely appreciate the desire for Ned to still be alive. He's clearly a great character, but if you say he's alive and plotting, first of all, you have to work out how that might be the case, because he clearly was beheaded in front of many, many witnesses. If he warged into the birds overhead, as some people I know have suggested, then we know from people like Varamir Sixskins that we're talking about that over time, then he would just lose himself within that. But far more importantly, I think that you have to say that if Ned survived in some way and is plotting, what you have to believe is that Ned Stark then completely abandoned his family. He did a miraculous escape, and then since then, he's not gone up to Winterfell. He's not gone to find his wife. He's not gone to find any of his children. He's not got involved in anything. He's not done a thing. And that, to me, seems completely out of character for him. So I can't see any way that it happened. I can't see any evidence that he's out there at all. And personally, I also can't see any plot reason why he would still be alive. I think that the whole point is that he died and it was shocking, and that was a core part of setting the scene for what Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire would be like, that nobody is safe, anybody can die. Let's go to a question. This is a bit of a random one, but it's one that I know that you have got thoughts about because we've talked about it before. Mrs. Mitch Connor from Patreon saying, hey, Robert, love the channel. Thank you so much. Have you talked about Jon's dream where he had Valyrian steel armor and how he might get this from Euron? So I think I will just hand this one over straight to LML, other than to say that I haven't done a video on it or anything like that, but I know that I've talked to LML before on one of these live streams about that very dream. But do you want to, there's so much symbolism going on there, do you want to just sort of quickly unpack what that symbolism is?
Yeah, it's the transitive property of black ice. So it's pretty simple, actually. So Jon, in his, quote, Azor Ahai dream, he's armored in black tuxedo ice, and while his blade burns red in his fist. And so this black ice is interesting. It sort of makes you think of the others who wear ice armor. But the other direction you can take it is thinking about Ned's sword, which is called ice, because it's nearly black. And in fact, one of Ned's recent ancestors, Barth Blacksword, gained his nickname from carrying ice, which people thought of as close enough to being black to call the guy Blacksword. So for all intents and purposes, Ned's sword is a black sword named Ice, and therefore it is black ice. So you could think of Valyrian steel as black ice, and then you could look at Euron's armor of Valyrian steel and see Jon's black ice armor and see that symbolically they could be talking about the same thing. So it could be foreshadowing that Jon's going to get Euron's Valyrian steel armor, and of course, if you're going to fight the others, Valyrian steel armor seems handy. However, Jon's black ice armor could also be foreshadowing that Jon's going to get turned into either a cold hands type of white, where he's an icy white and his skin literally becomes ice armor, or it could be foreshadowing that he's even going to turn into a new Night's King in some sense. And so it could go a couple different ways, because Dany dreams about burning the usurper's armies to ash on the River Trident, but they're armored in ice in her dream. And so it also seems like Dany fighting the others. And so that it's kind of weird. You think of Dany burning enemies armored in ice, and then Jon dreams about being armored in ice. Is that setting up a conflict between them even? I don't think so, but it's definitely an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a potential for conflict between the two of them, but I think you're entirely right on a lot of the symbolism there. This is one of the things I'm going to be picking up on in my R plus L equals J video, is the fact that there is a lot there going on that hints that Jon is Azor Ahai, or the prince that was promised, or anything, or something along those lines, and that is all the way through, connecting him as to the world, a child of ice, to fire symbolism, and there's an awful lot of that going on through Jon. Just to pick another random example, Melisandre looks into the flames and she says, she wants to see Azor Ahai, all she sees is snow. So there's a lot going on there. But as we're on the subject, Richard Hopp, thank you so much, $10, that's very kind. Is it possible that the prince who was promised are princes the Starks promised to the others as a sacrifice? The Starks quit sacrificing and the others are returning to claim their prince that was promised. I think there are a couple of different levels to this one. I don't think that's what's going on here. I think that this is quite specifically a kind of a prophecy that's aimed the Woods Witch, who later became the ghost of High Heart. She was prophesying about the prince that was promised through the Targaryen kingly line, and also it seemed to be used interchangeably by Melisandre for Azor Ahai. Is there a possibility that this is just a sort of a bastardization of another prophecy that's or mirror prophecy perhaps for the others? I think that it's entirely possible that they do have their own prophecies and things like that. But with all of these things, I take the view that after, I've said this about Azor Ahai many times, I think it applies to the prince that was promised. After all is said and done, we've watched all of the show, we've read all of the books, we will still be sitting here debating who was the prince that was promised, or Azor Ahai. I think that it's deliberately vague and it's not meant to be a specific thing. The action, the drama in this comes from the fact that people believe that they know exactly what prophecy means, but the whole point is that you don't. You can only see it looking backwards, and sometimes not even then. It can apply at a number of different levels to a number of different people and situations. But did you have any thoughts on whether the prince that was promised perhaps is a prophecy for connected with the others in a different way to having just a big hero who might hit them with a fiery sword?
So I do think that this at least could be true. And it gets back to what I was saying about Night's King and Night's Queen giving babies to the others. If you look at we're talking about parallels here. So think about Craster and Gilly and Monster. Monster is an unbelievable precedent, Robert, because Monster is a baby, and I'm talking about Gilly's son, who's nicknamed Monster.
Yeah.
He is essentially promised to the others, but isn't given to them. He's basically stolen from the others in a sense, because Craster has created some sort of pact with them where he has agreed to give them his male sons, and they prevent the whites and from killing him and his family. So basically, this baby that's been promised to the others has been stolen from them. And then what happens to that child? A Night's Watch member with a lot of last hero symbolism, who is Sam, smuggles that baby away. And they even talk about raising him at Winterfell as a Stark. And so, or not as a Stark, but in Winterfell, anyways. So this could be a historical parallel, and I believe it is. I think that House Stark essentially at some point is founded upon one of these stolen children of Knights King and Queen that wasn't converted into an other, but instead became a Stark, and that is why the Starks have a literal blood connection to the others, just like the Targs are the blood of the dragon. And so I think that I'm not sure if Jon necessarily needs to be given to the others, but there is at least the implication that the Starks are a line founded others. But the question of how that will be resolved and what that means is very up in the air.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that in terms of this idea of the prince that was promised maybe applying to more than one thing, I think, yes, Monster, I think that was an incredibly valid point. As a child that was promised, there are a lot of people who are promised for something or some reason. I don't think Monster is necessarily a prince, but certainly is a child who was promised to the others in the same way that we saw in the story of the Night's King, lots of children being given, offered, promised to the others. Donna Daly, thank you so much. £5 saying, probably a silly question. Is there a connection between the Empire of Dawn and Dawn at the south of Westeros? I don't think it is a silly question. I think that there's an echoing of language, certainly in English when it comes across. I think LML probably has some thoughts on symbolism, but clearly there is a connection between at least one part of Dawn being the Dane family, House Dane, who've got the Sword Dawn, Sword of the Morning. There is a lot of echo there with Dawn, the Empire of the Dawn, and obviously it's the fight for the Dawn, the war for the Dawn at the end of the long night. These things are all interconnected. Now, what does that mean? It means that House Dane are an incredibly old house. They're descended from the First Men, so then there's a lot more kind of First Men blood going on in the western bit of Dawn than you might actually first think. So they are descended at least partly from the First Men. Their sword is ancient, even more ancient than the Valyrian steel swords we've got going on around. So there's a certain element there of things going on. I've just lost LML on the live stream, so I'm just hoping that that's him going rather than the whole stream going down. But guys, can you shout if there's a problem? LML, you're back. Good. So do you have any thoughts on Dawn and the connection between dawns?
No, not really. Oh, wait. Did you say Dawn? Yeah, actually, you did a great summary there. I heard most of it. I just clicked the wrong tab, actually. I was trying to grab a link here. So I've got an episode called The Stark That Brings the Dawn. And if that title doesn't grab your attention, then I don't know what will. But essentially, the Danes and the Starks seem like two sides of a coin to me in terms of symbolism. As you know, Venus, the morning star, is also the even star. Most of you probably know that. And if you didn't, dropping in and out, nothing I can do about that. So Venus is a planet, of course, but it looks like a star in the sky. It actually looks like the brightest star. It's 4 times brighter than any star. And because of astronomy, it switches positions every 200 and some odd days, from rising in the morning when it looks called the morning star to rising in the evening, calling the even star. And as you know, the word lightbringer is a word that is derived from Venus. And essentially, when George is talking about lightbringer and the sword of the morning and dawn, these are all words that are drawn from the same Venus mythology. And so if House Stane represents the morning star and the dawn, House Stark is very much like the even star and the nighttime. And that's why the Starks are dark and grim, and they're the kings of winter, and they're up north, and they may have become the Night's King, and they've got their kings down in the crypts in the darkness, and Bran's in the darkness, and Jon Snow dresses in black, and all this stuff. And they have black swords. Even at the Tower of Joy, the famous lines, you have the sword of the morning, now it begins. Then you've got the Stark, now it ends. It's a perfect morning star, even star dichotomy expression. And so to get back to the Danes in particular, the reason why I think, and the reason why Aziz and I think this, is that essentially the Danes, they manifest Valyrian looks. Some of them have purple eyes. Dark stars are purple. Shara Dane's eyes are purple. Edric Dane's are sort of dark bluish purple. Ned Dane's got pale flaxen hair. Darkstar has Valyrian looking hair. So there's a lot of clues about this. So essentially the Danes seem like stranded descendants of the Great Empire of the Dawn. The reason why they look like Valyrians is because both the Valyrians and the Danes have a common ancestor back in Ashai in the Great Empire of the Dawn. And so that sword Dawn certainly could be some sort of remnant of that ancient Great Empire of the Dawn technology. It would make a lot of sense. It's totally inexplicable. It's the only thing like it. It's back in the Dawn Age, or the Age of Heroes, when the first men, like I said, only had crude iron and bronze. And then there's this Dawn, this unbreakable white sword. So Dawn might be dragon steel, or it might be, I've even speculated that it's a sword that used to belong to the others somehow, and it's got a tie to ice magic because of the whole milk glass symbolism. You know, the others have milk glass bones, and there's a bunch of other stuff there. So yes, I have lots of thoughts on Dawn. It's probably too many to get into, but I did share that link, the Stark that brings the dawn. And of course, all that stuff's at Lucifer Means Lightbringer. So yeah.
Do go and check that out. Guys, thank you so much for all these super chats. I'm going to try and get through these. Mod Mary 1, thank you so much. What if the Azor Ahai story is gender swapped and Dany stabs Jon and he becomes the prince that was promised? Yeah, I think I might pass that one over to LML. Your Azor Ahai stabbing one into another and all the rest of it. Is there a way that you can summarize that kind of mythical theory in a pithy way, and then to try and get it whether or not there might be a gender swap going on?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, the legend of Azor Ahai has Azor Ahai stabbing Nissa with a red sword, and this breaks the moon, and it lights the sword on fire and all this. So I think that it's very possible. Well, first of all, I'm not in favor of anybody getting stabbed to make a magic sword. I don't think that part of it's going to turn out to be literally replayed. I think that if it does happen, I think it might be something where, like, Jon's been turned into a zombie. He's defeated the others, or he's done his job, and maybe he just wants to die. You know, one of my theories about Jon is that he might become the new Cold Hands or something like Cold Hands. And so it's possible somebody's got to use a magic sword to, like, put him out of his misery at the end. So if there is a stabbing, I do favor the idea that it will be gender flipped. I absolutely am opposed to the idea that Jon's going to stab Dany. I would basically bet the farm that will not happen. It's way too problematic for George to do, and I just don't think he'll do that. So I give that a 0% chance, less than 0, in fact. But I do think I could see a gender swapped one, and if we do, then I think it'll be a twist. It won't be to make a flaming sword. It'll be something different.
Yeah, I could certainly see some sort of echo of it. I have to say now, the the idea that Danny might kill John makes sense in terms of the story, in that John is obviously, he can come back. So, or he has come back already. So it probably means less than the other way around. So I'm also not 100% convinced that there will be a literal stabbing of one to the other, but a sacrifice is what is seeming to be what this is about. And I think that is the key part, is that in order for there to be this kind of blood magic, we need to have a sacrifice. And that sacrifice creates the weapon, figuratively in some way, that helps end the war. So I can see that happening at a much more thematic level, is that somebody important to this central character has to be sacrificed in order to allow the others to be turned back. I don't think it's going to be a big battle and war and a sword that's going to do it, but there has to be a sacrifice somewhere. Kelly Morlock, thank you so much, saying people all over the world join hands, start a love train, love train. Nearly sang that. Thank you so much. That's very kind. The Disputed Lands saying, and thank you so much, $10. That's very kind. During the long night, the Rhoyne froze all the way down. The only hint we have of how far winter had fallen during the long night. Old Town just so happens to fall on the very same latitude. Thoughts? LML, do you know what Amanda's getting at here in terms of the link to Old Town?
Well, so yeah, we've talked a lot about Old Town because, like I said, it's the single best piece of hard evidence that Dragon Lords came to Westeros before the Long Night, this giant fused stone fortress. And just real quick, because people were asking, fused stone and oily stone, two different things, okay? Oily black stone is greasy looking, and it's either carved or unshaped. It's mysterious and inexplicable. We find it at the Sea Stone Chair. We find it at Yeen. We find it at Toad Isle, which is near Yeen, and we find it at Asshai. And then we have fused black stone, which was mostly made by the Valyrians. They made their roads out of fused black stone, their castles, the inner heart of Volantis, Dragonstone. Fused black stone is essentially two-part process. The dragons to melt the stone, and then some sort of sorcery to shape it, and then harden it and fix it into place. Fused stone is characterized by having no joints, seams, lines, cracks of any kind. It's all seamless. So oily black stone seems to be associated with dark magic, because at Yeen in Sithorios, the plants won't grow near it, and Asshai is haunted, and the Sea Stone Chair, there's even clues that it might be corrupting the people who sit on it. Fused black stone has none of those haunted associations. So the fused black stone at Old Town is very suggestive because it's evidence of Dragonlord presence. And it's called Battle Isle. Why is it called Battle Isle? I mean, the Maester is writing about it. It's even one of those pregnant, suggestive sentences where it's like, what battle is here? None can say, but it must have been important. And so it's like, Robert, the story here that suggests itself is that Battle Isle is a fortress trading outpost of the Great Empire of the Dawn. It was built so that they could interact with Westeros, just as the Phoenicians built cities like Tyre and Sidon on, sorry, not Sidon, Tyre and a couple others. I forget what they're called, but they're essentially built on islands just offshore, and they're used as fortified trading outposts. They don't conquer the land necessarily, but they sit on their island fortress. They control the seas, and they trade with the mainland. That's what Battle Isle reads like. And so the idea that there was a battle there, well, this is basically the Dragon Lord's toehold in Westeros. And so if Azor Ahai, quote unquote, invaded Westeros as a bad guy, which I believe he did, Battle Isle would have been the logical place to start. Your culture already has a fortress there, so you're going to marshal your forces there when you're going to invade Westeros. So this might have been the first battle of the War for the Dawn, or the series of events that led to the Long Night or caused the Long Night. And it's very significant. I'm not sure if Crowfoot's daughter was alluding to more than that, but when she's talking about how far down the snow came, She's just saying that the cold may have covered basically all of Westeros, and that the others may have made it this far. So it could have either been like maybe the last battle or the first battle. I favor it as the first battle, but I don't know what Crow Foods has planned there. So I'll be curious to see if she has anything to add.
Yeah, similarly, I don't think I've got huge amounts to say. I mean, the latitude issue, I think, is probably more likely to be coincidence. I like the idea that there was something significant that happened there in ancient times on Battle Isle. That seems to, obviously, the fortifications, though there's not a great fort, but the underground fortress does seem to have been there before all of this. So yeah, it was a pre-existing settlement of some kind. The High Tower was connected to Bran the Builder, so that's sort of at that period. So I quite like that. The only thing I would add into this is to note that this is yet again an island, and islands seem to have this kind of safe refuge and important part of this story. We've got the Isle of Faces, we've got Dragonstone, we've got this. Islands themselves seem to be where you protect yourself and the things that you think are most important. Starfall again, where we have the Dawn, the sword, on an island. So we get lots of these islands, and there always seem to be important things going on there. That I do not think is a coincidence. Veronica Dogon, $20. Thank you so much. LML and IDG best myth stream team. Oh, thank you. Do you think the practice of men going hunting during long winters was a lost practice of sacrificing themselves to the cold ones or the others, White Walkers, to save their family or kin? For those who don't know, that practice that still carries on in the north up to the present day in the books was that when the winter came, the old men would leave the castles and they would head out, what they would say, hunting, not intending to return. They were going to stay out during the winter, allowing the rest of the family, the younger people, to keep to the warmth and to have all the supplies, because they didn't know how long winter was going to go on for. Do I think that is a lost practice of sacrificing themselves to the others? Probably not. I think that it's probably much more likely to be just this is a practice of how, and there are lots of these different practices across the north of how do you cope with winter, and some of them are really quite brutal. This seems to me just one of those practices of how you cope with the winter. Sacrifices to the others tended more to be younger ones, children, babies, than older people. So it's not that you're not getting rid of the old people, you're offering new life in a way. Did you have anything to add to that, LML?
No, not really. I think the others want babies, not old people.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that one. And we've got Linda Pursuta, $20. Thank you so much. That's very, very generous of you. Again, I left this question too late on Patreon. Do you think it's possible that the cat's paw dagger in Arya's possession was remade from the last hero's broken sword of legend? Well, that's an excellent thought. I think the cat's paw dagger is what it seems to be. It is a Valyrian steel dagger with a that is used for its purpose, and it is a narrative device. I don't think, although it's had a lot more of a showing on the show, I don't think that this means that it's a significant thing in and of itself. It is just another Valyrian steel blade. So I don't think that it's a legendary piece. I think it's just something that was sort of there in the belongings of the king. Unless there's some imagery I'm unaware of, LML, is there some sort of imagery there?
I could say that a broken sword, which is a very important symbol, can be looked at as a dagger. And so archetypally speaking, Arya with a dagger is kind of like a last hero with a broken sword. But I don't think they're the same thing, no. But there's a couple super chats that it looks like you may have skipped over, Robert. So I'm going to go back and grab
sorry.
these.
Happy to
Well,
go and quickly flick back.
Yeah, it's okay. The bigger they are, the longer they stay up top. So sometimes they don't always stay up top in the order that they came in.
Yeah, you're right. I missed a couple here. So there was one from Sheeny Donut, 10 Canadian dollars. Thank you. I think the Hightower's base was made by dragon riding explorers from the Empire of the Dawn. I think we're sort of broadly agreed with that. But they shunned Westeros because they discovered it was exposed to the same threats beyond the 5 forts. That's an interesting question. I don't know whether they shunned Westeros. I think that they had a trading camp. This seems to be the thinking, is that they had a trading camp there. Presumably, the implication is initially with the Children of the Forest, even before humans went, or the first men went across there. But the Valyrians, although we might think of them as just like expanding their empire across the whole piece, actually it was a very slow build-up of the Valyrian freehold, taking on extra bits in time. So it's not that they shunned Westeros, it's just that they hadn't got there yet. It's that they'd still be moving out the areas of the free cities. They'd not, even right towards the end, they'd still not found the bit of was Bravos, so they hadn't conquered all of Essos, let alone thought about Westeros yet. So there were lots of little bits there. Dragonstone and Driftmark were also kind of like the western end, at the end of the Valyrian freehold. They were the western end there, so it's only then that they were starting to move across. But is there anything, we've been talking about the Hightower's base for a bit, is there anything else you want to add on that one?
Yeah, so the second half of the question. It's suggested in the Battle Isle section that if it was Valyrians that made the Fewstone Fortress, because they don't know about the Great Empire of the Dawn, so they're at a loss as to who could have made the Fewstone Fortress. They're like, well, it could have been Valyria, but Valyria wasn't around then, so. But essentially, they were saying that, if it was the Valyrians, why did they shun Westeros afterwards? And there's also, and Robert, you could be right, that they just didn't get to Westeros. However, I think that they were shunning it. Essentially, they weren't invading it proper. They were only setting foot on Driftmark and Dragonstone, but not Westeros. And when Aegon invaded Westeros on the very day that the Harrenhal was built, in a total defilement of the old gods, burning and harvesting weirwoods to make Harrenhal, that these are actually connected events. And I believe it's Jaime or Tyrion that actually muses on this and wonders why the Valyrians never came to Westeros when they knew that there was so much gold and riches to be had there. So I think it actually is up in the air, and that the reason there could be a thing. You imagine Azor Ahai invading Westeros. At some point, if he's a bad guy, he must have been humbled or defeated. And this might have even been why the others were made, in my opinion. And so then you had the Valyrians, who basically inherited all the power of Ashai, and they never came to Westeros. So maybe they retained a memory of, like, for example, Green Seers being able to fuck up Dragon Lords. That's kind of like the suggested thing here, is that maybe Bran can warg a dragon, maybe Green Seers can interfere with the dragon bond. And so if you had Green Seer kings or powerful Green Seer children of the forest, could be that the Valyrians retained a memory of that and were scared of Westeros because of it. But that's just a theory. It's definitely not anything I'm certain of, but I think there's enough to think it's possible.
Yeah, possible, I would say. Because it's you, I won't say speculation, but I would say
it's speculative. It is.
There's not evidence. It's one of those things that we don't have the evidence. We do not know. What we can say is that the Valyrians didn't conquer all of Essos, so there's no reason why they would conquer Westeros before they finished conquering Essos. But as you say, there are some hints that perhaps there's more to it. Bridget Walsh, thank you so much. $5 saying, Ygritte Weirwood asked, and I love it when people do this, picking out what other people have asked in the chat when sometimes we haven't spotted it, and flagging it for us with a super chat. That's really kind. Ygritte Weirwood asked, was the breaking of the arm, this is the arm of Dawn, not to keep men out, but to keep the whites on Westeros. I do like this idea. I don't think, again, I don't think we've got the evidence to say one way or the other, because the timing of these things is kind of lost to us. But I don't see any reason to dispute this idea of trying to stop men coming in by breaking it off there. That seems to make sense to me as a kind of a narrative. But also it makes sense of trying to stop the White Walkers from heading across if we do think that they cannot cross open water, which there seems to be a reasonable amount of evidence that that's the case. So I like it, but again, I don't think we've got enough evidence to suggest one way or the other. Anything on that one, LML?
No, I'd agree. It's very original thinking. I like the thinking behind it. I specifically have theories that contradict it, because I think the hammer fell at the start of the long night. But I like the thinking. And also I like the fact that the question touches on the fact that the official story of the Hammer of the Waters doesn't make any sense. And in fact, the World of Ice and Fire even points out that it doesn't make any sense. Why would they, after the first men have been crossing into Westeros for hundreds or even thousands of years, to the point where they've already vastly outnumbered the children, what's the point of the elves, who love nature and love the trees and shit, causing this giant disaster, destruction of the land, to basically close the barn door after the horses have already escaped, to use a colloquialism? I don't know if you have that one in Britain, but we have it over here, and you get the meaning, right?
Absolutely, and we do have that phrase. I agree. There's bits there that don't make sense, as in all of these stories, that they just doesn't completely tie in. If they'd done it at the beginning, when there's only a handful come across, then that kind of makes sense. But perhaps then they didn't realize the threat. Who knows? It's another one for speculation. Michelle Kalen, thank you so much, $10, saying, doesn't it look like Jeor Mormont's taking of the Black was the equivalent of going hunting? So this is going back to what we were talking about a moment ago, where in the north, older men would often sort of head out when it came to winter to try and protect those who stayed without intending to return. I guess you could interpret it that way. I think I would interpret it at face value, is that he felt that at the time, he could leave his house in good hands. He could leave it in the hands of Jorah Mormont, and also his sister was there, who was an indomitable woman, and I think that he just felt that he could pass it on to the next generation. And although in the South, the idea of going to the wall voluntarily is quite a laughable one, in the North, we have to remember, and particularly amongst the first men, it was still seen by some as an honourable decision. That's the whole point about this, the Waymar Royce, why he was there in the first place, the character that we meet in the prologue. He thought that this was an honourable thing for him to go off and do. And I think that if you look, we were talking about latitudes a bit ago, but actually you'll find of all the settlements in Westeros, the most northerly, south of the wall, the most northerly one actually is Bear Island. So they probably feel closest to the wall out of everyone, perhaps not in terms of land, but when it freezes over, there's a land bridge, as it were, across to there. So I think I take it at face value. I think he felt that he'd done his time and he wished to pass it on to the next generation. I will quickly get on to the next one, and then LML, if you want to come in on either of them, because we've got 3 or 4 more super chats. I'm quickly doing this. Zach the Dornish, thank you so much, saying, I'm off topic. How's everyone's Valentine? It's no longer Valentine's Day for me, I'm afraid, so I shall duck that question, but I had a lovely Thursday, thank you. Stacey Bauer, $20, thank you so much, saying, thank you for getting us through this long night. Love your channels, and on this happy Valentine's Day, much love and appreciation to you. Thank you, that's really kind. Do you think Jon and Dany's baby could be a or the sacrifice to Westeros? Well, why don't you start on that one? And then if you wanted to pick up on either of those other two super chats, either about Valentine's Day or Gerald Mormont, that would be great. But what do you think in terms of John and Danny's baby, which obviously they haven't had yet, and there's not even a mention of pregnancy yet, even on the show. So this is taking an extra step forward. But what do you think on that?
So there's three possible plot purposes for John and Danny's baby, right? It's either going to be a sign of hope for the future, so that if John and Danny die heroically, we see somebody raising this baby and know that there's hope for the next generation. Or it could be that the baby is used for magical sacrifice. There's so much precedent for magical sacrifice on both the sides of ice and fire that could be a reason. And the third reason, which is less likely, is simply that George might use a miscarriage or some sort of tragedy as something to drive the heart and conflict of certain characters. So it's one of those three, and I would say the magical sacrifice possibility is pretty decently strong. So that's definitely possible. As far as the other two, what was the Jorah Mormont question exactly?
Is this an echo of the going hunting that some old northern men do during the winter?
Oh, you mean when he leads that ranging?
Oh, when he goes to the wall, as in he leaves his home and he joins the Night's Watch.
Yes, I could see that, absolutely. You'd almost imagine like the old men going hunting, instead of just wandering off and dying. After the Night's Watch was formed, they might just go to the Night's Watch. I mean, we've also got the father of the 79 Sentinels guy who went in his last days to sort of join his son before he died. So, yep, that's possible. And then real quick, Robert, on the Phoenician cities thing, I wanted to circle back and point out that not only is Battle Isle read like that, Dragonstone is exactly the same. That is exactly what Dragonstone was. It was a fortified trading colony. And they used that and Driftmark to basically control the Narrow Sea and the trade to Westeros. Then you have Volantis. And I believe, I'm looking at my map, I think Tyrosh is also an island fortress that was started off as a trading colony. So it definitely seems like George is using that template for the Valyrians and the Great Empire of the Dawn, which I think is really cool. I just love the Phoenicians. So,
yeah. Go on. If you want,
actually, I'm done. I already made the other point. Go ahead.
I was going to say, guys, I'm going to start. I'm starting to flag now, I have to admit. So I'm gonna start rounding this off. So you've got about 10 more minutes, if that's okay. So this is your chance for any last questions. The only thing I would add, just on the John and Danny baby thing, is, if we think, and I would agree that the idea of a sacrifice has a kind of gruesome appeal to it, because with the talk of king's blood all the way through, is there any more powerful blood than that of Jon, the child of Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen? I suspect not. But if we're thinking that might be the case on the show, there are only 6 episodes, and we'd have to see Danny go all the way through to full term. So we've got a series lasting 9 months, and then have a baby, and then for things to happen. That seems like quite a push for me. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but I think we do need to think whether or not that's likely. Lexi Luminescent, thank you so much for the super chat. Is there any evidence of ancient calendar sites like Stonehenge in our world? Are there any, this is definitely a question for you, LML, are there any calendar type sites that we've got, other than like the High Tower, which is used as a sort of a massive sundial, of course?
Well, there's standing stones that are attributed to the First Men and to the ancient Andals over in Essos, but we're not really told what they do. I think we're just supposed to assume that, like most ancient monolithic monuments, they had astronomical correlations and alignments. I mean, that's just kind of par for the course. But Martin doesn't really seem to be using that a ton. Although, going back in the chat, somebody was mentioning Jojo Lady Dane and the Disputed Lands. And this is what Crowfood's daughter was getting at when she's talking about the same latitude. George could be using the idea of ley lines, Robert, where a lot of the famous spiritual megalithic monuments around the world are built upon the 5 meridians, and at similar latitudes. There's some interesting sort of occult pseudoscience kind of lore built around that George could be definitely pulling from, because the Five Forts, Old Town, and something else are all on the same latitude, she was saying. So
yeah, and the other, actually, this is, I mean, I don't know whether this is a valid point or not, but if you look at a map of Essos and you look at the dragon roads that you were talking about earlier, the fused black stone, and they're in straight lines, and they do actually look very similar to, if you look at maps of ley lines in England, which are supposedly the lines of energy connecting ancient sites like Glastonbury Tor and Stonehenge and Canterbury Cathedral and things like that. They look very similarly, these straight lines heading across a big landmass connecting important places. So it might be just a coincidence, but it was something that I've certainly thought of in the past when I was looking at the maps. Cool. Kids28, thank you so much. $10, just saying, always a pleasure. I've been really enjoying this one. So thank you so much for that. Let's just round off by anime lover Nicole. And this was a question, actually, possibly from the super chat right near the beginning as well. Whether there's a connection between Garth Greenhand's children and heroes like Lan the Clever, Brandon the Builder, and so on. And also, could Lan be a girl, since Lannister sounds a lot like Lan's sister? What do you think of that? Is there? I think I'm just going to turn this into an open question to you, LML, about any of the heroes from the Age of Heroes. If you could pick up on Lan, that would be great. But is there anything, any of those particular heroes you'd want to pick up on?
No, I can specifically address both of those things. The Lan sister idea is really cool. I've been a little while since I've read it, and I don't have all the details on the top of my head. But there's some interesting stuff with Cersei and being the firstborn and wishing she had the cock and could, rule. And then she does rule in the show and probably will in the books. And there are some other interesting clues that support it. It's sort of the layered symbolic stuff, but I think it's Westeros, also known as Unchained, and some of the other myth heads that have keyed in on that. So maybe on a future live stream we could get back to that, or somebody might be making a video about it at some point. And then as far as the Garth the Green is really cool because his 12 children are tied to not only all the houses of the Reach, but also Lan the Clever and Bran the Builder. So Lan the Clever is said to descend either from Floris the Fox or Rowan Goldtree. And Tywin is labeled a clever fox. And there's some other cool fox symbolism for the Lannisters. And then Brandon the Builder was supposedly a descendant of Brandon of the Bloody Blade, who was one of Garth's children. And of course, one thinks of Brandon Stark and how he loved his bloody blade and how he loved to hone his sword. The Lady Barbary Dustin speech in the Crypts of Winterfell when she's talking to Theon about how Brandon loved to polish his sword and he liked the sight of my maiden's blood on his cock too. And there's all this bloody sword sort of double entendre. Robert, it's one of the clues that Lightbringer is a penis, essentially, the whole bloody sword symbol. So the idea that, to answer the question, the bloody sword of Brandon of the Bloody Blade, that symbol is specifically drawn upon by Martin when talking about Brandon Stark, Ned's brother. And so that kind of is a clue that, yes, Bran the Builder is descended from Bran the Bloody Blade, which means the Starks descend from Garth the Green in some sense. And there's a couple of cool clues about that in House Gardner. There's a Grey Eyes Garth and something else too. But I won't go too far, but yeah, that's cool.
And if you're talking about the Bloody Blade, as we say, then we've got Rhaegar and Lyanna, of course. The potential that then brings forth Lightbringer. So could Jon therefore be Lightbringer, the thing which wins the war for the battle for the Dawn? It's another layer to all of this kind of understanding. But guys, I'm going to bring that to a close now. Thank you so much. We've had so many amazing questions in the chat. A big thank you to LML for coming on. Guys, I would highly recommend you check out his channel, but do you want to remind everyone where they can find you on the internet?
So lucifermeanslightbringer.com has all of my essays. I also have a YouTube channel and a podcast. The YouTube channel is also lucifermeanslightbringer.com. And the whole idea with my thing is that I write essays, which then I turn into podcasts, which are word for word the same thing. And so if you want to look up the podcast on iTunes, it's called The Mythical Astronomy of Ice and Fire. And on the YouTube channel, what you're going to find is a live presentation of me reading my scripts, where we stop and discuss, and Sandry does live drawings. I have guests on, and we sort of discuss the theory as it unravels. And then I sort of edit that down and put out just the theory on the podcast. So you can read it, you can listen to it, you can watch it be illustrated, you can do any of those things. But lucifermeanslightbringer.com is where you get started. And Robert, thank you very much for having me on this Valentine's Day. I hope it felt like there was magic in the air. It really did. And I had a great time. I think everybody in the chat had a great time. Somebody said they felt like a third wheel on our sort of
special night.
Yeah, special night. That's a good way to put it. So thank you, all of you. All of you have been our third wheel, and we wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, thank you again, guys. Please do go and check out LML on any of his different channels. But I just wanted to say publicly, I think I said it to you before, LML recently got to 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is a big success and well-deserved. So well done. Guys, from me, I would just say again, a big thank you to everyone in the chat. A huge thank you to my patrons. If you are at all interested in becoming a patron to support the channel or get access to some extra stuff, get an extra chance to get your questions answered on these live streams, please do go and check out patreon.com/InDeepGeek. There's a link down in the description. Thank you all. I'll be back again this time next week with another guest and another chat. And on Saturday, I will let you know the time, but I'm planning on doing a Europe-friendly time live stream. So keep an eye out on Twitter, and you'll hopefully find out when that is quite soon. Guys, thank you. Take care, and I shall see you again soon.